Hi, Anat. Okay, so let's just start landing. So first, I just want to invite everybody to look around, look away from your screen. Just look around at your surroundings. Notice that everything has 3 dimensions and not flat, not in little, not square, and not flat. Yeah, and let's take 3 deep breaths. Just bring ourselves into presence in this room of squares. There's 2 screens of people. So just looking around. Some people we know, some we don't. Some we've been together with for the last couple days. Welcome, everybody. So again, with those breaths, get yourself comfortable. Feel your feet on the ground or your body, wherever it makes contact with the ground or your seat. Relax. Our Tai Chi teacher, Dylan, says, sink the weight and breathe and relax. And I have to remember that because I'm very nervous. Want to go ahead, Anya?
Yeah, so as we arrive to our bodies and to our breath, just taking a look at the faces, maybe even scroll to the second page, just taking in everyone. Taking in the community that is the community of this particular workshop. And so I'd like to first ask us to all really think about the indigenous history of the land that we are inhabiting right now, wherever you are in the world. You can close your eyes. You can just allow in whatever images come, whether you know the names of the native people or you don't. Honoring the memory, the lineage, the people who held this land before us, who stewarded this land before us and paved the way for us to be sitting right here. And letting that in with the breath. And when you're ready, just open your eyes. And I'd like to ask us to identify ourselves based on how we identify ourselves. So, who here in this workshop identifies as a person of color? Raise your hand and leave it up so that we can see it on the screen and we can scroll through. So I'm counting 2 people, myself included.
3.
Where is the other hand?
Heather.
Thank you. You're off in the corner. My apologies. Leave your hand up, Heather, Spencer. And I just want us to take it all in.
There's 4. There's another gentleman, Greg.
Okay.
Oh, Greg, sorry. Yeah, we didn't see you down in the corner. It's really hard to get all these screens, so forgive us for...
And that's fine. This is why I'm asking, right? This is why I'm naming, right? So we get everyone. Is there anyone else?
I don't see anybody else.
Okay. So
I just came in, I didn't hear the question.
right, so we're asking the people who identify as people of color who are in this workshop to raise their hands. Okay, and so that's 4 people, and there's 31 participants. So thank you for those who raised your hand, for making that effort to keep your hand raised. And I just invite us to all just be aware. Be aware of who's at Llama. Without judgment or blame, just noticing who keeps coming back to Llama or hears about Llama or finds out about Llama. Because Llama is an extraordinary space, and it's a privilege to get to be at Llama. And so just noticing who gets to participate in that privilege. And how does it feel to sit with that? It's not a question for the group, it's a question for you to ask yourself. Okay. So, Miriam, I think that...
Sure. So, Ella and I wanted to introduce ourselves and our intentions for this time together. And so I wanted to begin by just sort of saying how this workshop kind of came about. So about a month ago, it was the annual gathering at Llama, and Ella wrote a letter to the trustees to be shared with the continuing members, with the members of Llama. And Ella described some of the difficult experiences that you've had as a person of color at Llama. And the letter raised questions for us about, after all these years and in this time, what are we going to do about it, essentially? And it was a very articulate and, Ellis clearly had spent a lot of time thinking about it. So after that meeting, I set up a little meeting with a couple of trustees and a resident with Ella to talk about the questions she had raised, and we spent a couple of hours together. It was a really very fruitful, very heartful sharing in which Ella courageously sat with 3 white women and shared some very painful emotional stuff, and we all learned a lot together. And somehow, then in the ongoing conversation, Ella and I, this evolved. So just sort of in the last week or so. So in the process, Ella and I have, I'd met Ella, I don't know, maybe 3 times on the portal. We didn't hardly know each other, but in these days of talking about addressing that letter that Ella wrote to the trustees, and then in deciding to do this workshop and in figuring it all out, we've sort of fallen in love with each other a little bit. I'm so emotional, so I'm sorry, but anyway, so just to say that this is not a polished workshop. We've spent time thinking about it, and we've learned a lot from each other in the process, and we hope to continue learning and sharing a little of what we've been learning with each other with you today. And it's really, in some ways, the beginning of a conversation. So a little bit about me. I'm a trustee at the Lama Foundation. I lived at Lama from 1986 to 1991. And I live in Albuquerque, and where I work as a hospice chaplain. And yeah, so that's enough from me, about me. Ella, for you.
Thank you, Miriam. I have fallen in love with you too. I have been coming to Lama, because we are at Lama. I've been coming to Lama since 2004. And my particular spiritual journey has always been about integrating the emotional and political with the spiritual. And I was born a child of the 2 Mexican immigrants, and I was raised in a suburb of East Los Angeles called Whittier, but we called it Whittier. And I was exposed to gang activity at a young age. My father was incarcerated 4 times before he went straight, got into college, got his master's degree, where he met my mother. And so I come from 2 Mexican immigrants who were college educated and who were exposed to a lot of the hippie movement while being at college in the late 60s. So I went to yoga classes in Spanish in Boyle Heights, which is a pretty rough part of East LA. When I was 4 years old, I was, doing yoga. So my experience of being a Mexican American has been unique, and I've also experienced a lot of assumptions projected towards me about how I must be, or that I must be Catholic, or so. That's all just to say that I am only able to speak for myself and my experience, and I'm not speaking for other people of color. And to the people of color here, I am not an expert on your experience, and your experience is valuable and important. And it's valuable and important in this space, and it's valuable, important in the world. As somebody who has often been mischaracterized as white, I have straddled 2 cultures. And I'm really passionate about how we can approach social justice from a connected, fiercely loving, and heart-led way. As I've seen, various movements come and go, like the Occupy movement, which I participated in. How do we make social justice sustainable? And I believe that it becomes sustainable when we stay connected to ourselves and our hearts while doing the work. So I'm very passionate about nonviolent communication, and it's otherwise known as compassionate communication. I've taught that at Llama for several years, and I've never taught a racial justice or, any kind of, race, class, gender, privilege, oppression workshop. And so I just want to say I'm learning, and I learn from all of you. So thank you for showing up. The fact that you're here means that you want equality, care, freedom. You want love. Now I'm getting emotional.
Ella, can I just say, just one thing occurs to me about identity is that for some of us, and I can speak for myself as a Jew, we grow up, and for many of us, being white is a wasp, and we're not wasps. So many of us don't identify as white inside, but our street identity is white because we, after the civil rights movement, we became white, and we gained white privilege, and so we live that way. So it's this whole thing of identity and all of this it's very nuanced, it's very multi-layered and very complex. But I just wanted to acknowledge that there's something that's like internal identity, and then there's like a street identity. So I know that when I go into a department store, I don't have to worry that the security person is going to follow me around because I have white skin. Anyway, so I just wanted to say that. And we were going to just talk about just a few group agreements, although, yeah, so just to let you know that if there's some sharing that somehow doesn't feel right, that I may, or one of us might interrupt you, if that comes about. Just wanted to let you know that that's a possibility. We wanted to ask for confidentiality. And that what gets said here stays here. And also that if anybody shares anything in the small group, that confidentiality means not only that it's not that you don't talk about it outside of the group, but you don't refer to a person's sharing or even go up to them. Of course, we're not here in person, so it's a little different, but you don't approach them and talk about their sharing without their permission, without.
I want to jump in here around group agreements because I'm already seeing some questions coming up in the chat.
Okay.
And one of the group agreements was regarding the chat. So with an hour and 15 minutes and 33 of us, there's a deep desire that I have for inclusion of all ideas and thoughts. And I also feel torn around that because I'm also really wanting to not necessarily highlight one particular group's experience and then have the end of the workshop come up and have another group of people who maybe didn't speak their needs feel dropped. So my request would be that the questions that get asked in the chat are specifically clarifying questions, because we will have a time for questions at the end. And at that time, we'll be able to address a handful of burning questions. And we've really given this a lot of thought. This topic can be really charged for people. A lot can come up, and I want to really honor that if you have questions that come up, you have things that come up, that is not necessarily going to be able to be aired verbally, but it's held. And we will pair people in groups. You'll be able to talk about it. We will place people in pairs, not groups, and you'll be able to talk about it in that space as well, like I said, at the end. So that's our request around the chat, that it just be for clarifying questions. Thank you.
Okay. Spencer had a procedural question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everything you've presented so far has been good in terms of how we're going to do this. I do question the recording of this time together.
Oh, yes.
I feel like that would be restrictive in terms of what people might be willing to share.
Yeah, so thanks, Spencer. That's really helpful. I want to say that the breakout groups will not be recorded. And I wonder, Heather, can we ask that just that area of the workshop where people are, making questions and comments not be recorded? So then, Spencer, the only part that would be recorded would be what Miriam and I are saying. How does that fit with you? Does that sound good? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Okay.
So, Miriam, did you have any other group?
No, I think we're done.
Okay. So, you may want a pen and paper. You don't need it now, but you can set it aside. And my intention here is that we approach this topic from a place of embodiment and self-connection. So I invite you to close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And if it's not, then I invite you to leave them open. See if you can go inside. See if there's sensations that have come up just from this much of the workshop. And see if you can allow that to be just as it is, without trying to fix it or shift it in some way. And as you breathe into your body, I want you to, if it serves you, just track your body and see what arises when I make the following statement. Let's talk about race in America. What happens in the body, in your body, when you hear me say, let's talk about race in America? It might be subtle, it might be intense. Notice if you want to fix it or if you have lots of thoughts. And I would propose that if you have lots of thoughts, that that's a way of not being in the body. So you can thank your thoughts and then come back to the sensations in the body. Let's talk about race in America. And so when you're ready, you can grab that pen and paper and you can do some journaling. Just bringing some words to what you just experienced. And we're going to give you about 2.5 minutes. And so after another sentence or so, you can look back at the screen to let me know that you're ready to move on. So there's lots of different feelings that can come up. There can be real fear. There can be shame. There can be outrage. It's a real big, there can be celebration that we're talking about it. Gratitude, relief. So there's a broad spectrum of things that can come up in our system when we contemplate talking about race. And a lot of discomfort. And so we're going to go ahead and transition, and Miriam's going to first share some thoughts and concepts, and then I will follow.
So I'm going to screen share. And what this is an excerpt that I've taken that I adapted from Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And so she has here different responses that white people tend to make when they are either responding from a mainstream framework or people who've already started paying attention to waking up to this work. So she says that those who just have a mainstream framework, when they are perhaps given feedback or criticism, that immediately tend to feel singled out, attacked, shamed, guilty, accused, insulted, angry, outraged. They might start crying, leave, argue, denying or avoiding. People tend to focus on intentions, like, oh, well, it wasn't my intention to do that. They could say things like, you're judging me. I only said one little innocent thing. You misunderstood. I know people of color. You know, that's sort of like some of my best friends. And then there are some underlying beliefs, like, I'm not a racist. I don't have any conscious bias. I'm a good person. How can I be a racist? And this kind of mainstream response tends to minimize. It holds everything in place. It silences a discussion. It can hijack the discussion. So on the other side, when people have started to become aware and take on an anti-racist framework, they might feel gratitude, discomfort, embarrassment. I can share here actually one of the things that happened between Ella and me in the early part of our discussions together, that Ella, do you mind if I share this?
No, not at all.
That Ella was expressing some outrage and some anger and hurt. And I was, I guess my own pattern is to sort of make peace, try to calm things down, make peace. And I was trying to defend the situation that had upset her and explain it. And Ella was really great at pointing out to me what I was doing, that with all the good intentions that I had to try to make her feel better or smooth things out, that what I was actually doing was closing her down, not allowing her to have her feelings. And so it was interesting, because then I shared it with a friend who said, well, Miriam, you always do that. And it was funny, there was some way in which, when it was in the interaction with you, Ella, that I was able to really get it in a way that I hadn't before. So I did listen. I was embarrassed, but I did. I heard it, and then this is my reaction. Boy, this is so hard. Oops. I need to build my capacity to tolerate discomfort. These were all, and I have work to do. So the underlying beliefs in that kind of response is understanding that racism is multi-layered, that we all have blind spots, that feedback is really hard to receive and it's hard to give, that the only way through it, the only way out is through it. It can't be avoided. And it's not about being good or bad. So hopefully this way of responding allows for growth, interrupts racism, builds trust. I think it certainly, in terms of, in our relationship, Ella's ability to call me on that and to give me that difficult feedback, and for me to be able to hear it, has gone a long way in terms of building our relationship and our ability to do this workshop together. Anyway, so that's so the full document of that I took this from, of Robin DiAngelo's, is available on her. There's a link here. Heather, can you take this link and put it in the chat, or should I? Can you take it off my document?
Fortunately, I cannot. I wish I could. I can't. Sorry.
All right, well, I'll figure out a way to get it into the chat. Anyway, it just seemed like I wanted to share that, because really it was pertinent and germane to my experience in preparing for this workshop, and in having discussions about racism. It's one of the things that makes it so difficult, is that the defensiveness and the shame and the guilt that comes up for people. So, yeah, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm very moved, Miriam. And my experience is that I'm seeing modeled in what you're saying, the behavior and the approach that I would love my white brothers and sisters, in all walks of life, to be able to do, to have the capacity to do. So I'm very moved by your vulnerability and your courage in sharing that. And also the way that you did take in my feedback. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later, if there's more that you want to share now.
I don't think so. I just, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm just, although I guess the thing that I didn't say about myself is that I was born and raised in South Africa, and lived there until I was 15. And so I happen to be very aware of my conditioning and you know, of being white, because of course I lived in a place where I went to white schools and white teachers and white buses, and I used different doors that said, you know, in South Africa, in English, it didn't really say white, it said Europeans often. Sometimes it's in the Afrikaans language, it said whites, and sometimes it said whites, but it said Europeans, because we were considered Europeans. And anyway, so I have a lot of stories about, and I have had some experiences where I have seen, I had a really, really powerful experience once that I won't go into the whole details, but I really saw how my mind played a trick on me, that I saw a Black person in a particular way that what, and what he was not, it was just totally, my mind just completely played a trick on me. And it just showed me like really the power of the conditioning that we have. And didn't come from like anything that my parents shared or conversations. It was, you know, it was just the soup that I was swimming in. It was just the white supremacy of, you know, that I was swimming in, which was very pronounced in my upbringing. So anyway, that's enough for me. You go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I shared with Miriam is that it's, I wonder if being raised in a country in which she was in explicit apartheid allowed her to more easily see that the US has a system of implicit apartheid. Certainly in how our political systems treat Black people and other marginalized people of color. So that's kind of a side note. Another thing that I want to share is that, you know, my version or my experience of that interaction that I had with Miriam is that when I got those emails, the first place I went to was shame, that I had been outraged, that I had, that I was too angry, and that I was being disruptive. And so I had to be able to kind of grow myself and tolerate and look at my internalized racism and look at the shame that was arising in me, and then talk back to that and say, I get to be outraged and I get to have these feelings. And tell myself, I give myself permission to have my own experience. Because the first place I went was deferring to the status quo, which is the voices that say, I'm overreacting, that this is my issue and my problem. The other thing that I want to say is the reason why my approach is about being self-connected and connected to the body and connected to the heart. Because the way that I communicated with Miriam was to say, I really see how you want harmony and how you want people to be at peace. And I want to let you know that I get to be outraged and I get to question communities. And so while this isn't a nonviolent communication workshop, I want to let you know that my approach is entirely based on a paradigm in which I connect to my precious human needs, and I see the human needs that motivate behavior that I might be triggered by. And so the conversation might have gone differently. So if I had called her out and, you know, told her that she was a, you know, an ambassador of white supremacy or whatever. Not that I ever thought that, but I'm just saying that those extreme triggers sometimes leave us as people of color feeling even more defeated than when we started. So that was not what I was planning on sharing with y'all. So I'll go ahead and share this now. So let's see here. So, healing from internalized racism. You can't see it behind all those little boxes. So this is also from Robin DiAngelo. We're using the term white supremacy more and more frequently these days. And so it's helpful for us to know that what we're talking about is not necessarily extremists or neo-Nazis. As she says here, it's a sociological term for a society in which white people are the ideal for humanity and everyone else is a deficient version. And Black people are cast as the most deficient. There's something profoundly anti-Black in this culture. So I wanted to let people know that Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter and that whole movement is what's brought a real national reckoning, specifically around state-sanctioned violence. Yes, for decades we've talked about our individual stereotypes, prejudices, biases. But what's been revealed is that the entire system is organized to perpetuate itself and to keep people from moving in and out of their predetermined place. But I specifically wanted to share this last quote where it says, "Every day we recommit to healing ourselves and each other and to co-creating alongside comrades, allies, and family, a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported." Oftentimes, when Black Lives Matter is covered in the media, it's with the angry protests. But there's a vision here that is very, it's beautiful and it takes hard work. So for people of color, healing is about unlearning, undoing, untangling the impact of racism inside of ourselves. Just like what I shared with you, the ways in which the dominant culture conditioned me to go, oh, I'm the one who's making a big deal out of this. So this is specifically for the other people of color in this workshop. But I also think just like it's healing for us as people of color to see white folks looking at white fragility, I think it's important for white folks to see what we actually have to unpack and the emotional labor that we are dealing with on a minute-by-minute basis. And like I said, I can't speak for all people of color. This is my experience. However, I know a lot of people of color, and this is something that is not unique. So, one, feeling that we are in some way inherently not as worthy, capable, intelligent, beautiful, or good as white people. 2, colorism within racial groups. So colorism is prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone or among people of the same racial group. 3, restriction of speech or mannerisms to avoid being labeled too black or ghetto. 4, strict commitment to painful and costly hair care regimen, denial of indigenous ancestry, attempts to look respectable to white culture. 5, feelings of not being black enough or Mexican enough or outsiders amidst our own cultures. And I can personally share that, you know, there were times as a little girl where I would walk into white spaces and I would feel so embarrassed. And I remember just trying so hard to look normal to them. And being so embarrassed of my mom, who's like my hero. And but as a little girl, all I wanted was to be acceptable to these white folks who I didn't feel good enough for. Even amidst being very light complected as a Mexican American and being the recipient of an incredible level of privilege that other Mexican Americans didn't necessarily have. So 5 steps to healing internalized racism are awareness. We must name it. And acknowledge the traumatic thoughts, the internalized negative messages. Breathe. And don't ignore. Don't isolate. And self-reflect. So this goes for all of us, right? When there's shame, we don't want to know what's under that shame. If we can feel the shame and then we can set that, recognize it for what it is, not avoid it, and say, okay, I'm embarrassed that I have this internalized racism, or I'm embarrassed that I have these thoughts of racism, and I'm going to look at this anyway. And share. Share with friends, family, community that can help us recognize internalized racism and dismantle it in our lives. So I had to call a whole lot of people of color when I was triggered about something recently, and it really helped. And so the questions that I ask for all of us to ask ourselves is, what will it take for you to love yourself fiercely just as you are? Is there anything about yourself that you have difficulty loving fiercely? And if so, what steps can you take towards loving that part of yourself, even that part of yourself? And for the people of color, can we identify how we may have internalized racism? And if so, what steps can we take to actualizing our full humanity, power, and wisdom? And I would add authenticity. And this is just something that I want, I invite you all to just take in. And this comes from a different article from a white ally who talked to many people of color and heard repeatedly that this is what people of color want from white allies. And so you can just kind of let your eyes roam and just take it in. Okay. So maybe just take 30 seconds to just write down what's come up. Maybe naming those parts of yourself that you're having a hard time loving, that you're having a hard time facing. And we'll just give this about 20 more seconds. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and transition to partnering up. And I want to say that if anyone's uncomfortable being partnered up, you can end the session and come back to the main screen. So this is not a mandatory practice. And, you know, it's important to both Miriam and I that people feel safe. So really just check in with yourself and be at choice.
So when you're in pairs, it's just the opportunity to share with each other. We ask that you don't give advice, just, you know, really listen to your partner, whatever they want to share or don't want to share. Remember to check in with your bodies. Some of us were in the session with, well, just like Ella says, and our friend Asana Ray also teaching about letting it drop in the body and listening to what your body wants to share, listening to how your body feels. So Heather, you'll put people into, looks like we'll have 10. No.
Right, so we're going to have 3 minutes each, 6 minutes total, okay? And then you'll be brought back to the main group. Thank you for that clarifying question. Grateful.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, here we go.
All right.